This is Gabriela on the scene today with Talk Network Radio. We have a real treat for you just around the corner, and that is Empowered Living with Jeff Byrd. Jeff is the owner of Jeffrey Byrd Coaching, and he will be coming to you weekly to teach you more about empowered living. Now, let's join Jeff already in the studio.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeff Byrd of Jeffrey Byrd Coaching, and this is Empowered Living. Our topic today is going to be one that impacts us all on a daily basis. The title is Connect First and Then Communicate. Connect first, then communicate. John Maxwell wrote a book entitled Everyone Communicates, You Connect. And in that book, he said that connection increases our influence in every situation. And isn't that the truth? If it's with a family member, if it's with a spouse, our colleagues, our boss, our clients, if we can connect with them on a level where they are and that they can appreciate, then it's going to increase our influence in every situation. Now, David Burns, maybe you remember, he was with the group The Talking Heads, and he once said in a song, "You talk a lot, but you're not saying anything." I have to laugh at that. I think he's saying very much the same thing as John Maxwell with everyone communicates, few connect, but he's saying it a little more bluntly. But don't you know that's the truth? And haven't we all experienced that we're around people and they're talking a lot, but they're just not really saying much, or at least not much of anything that matters to us, because they've missed connecting with us. They missed finding out where we are before they started talking. And truth be told, if we're going to be honest, we've all done it too. If you've ever been in a conversation like I have and you realize a few minutes in, I have completely lost this person. I have just been babbling about what was on my mind, and they have not connected. I have no idea where they are. Let me just stop and back up and go try to find them and start all over again if it's possible. A number of years ago, I was training as a service technician for a medical equipment company, and there was an older, kind of gruff guy. He had a heart of gold, but the way he came across was gruff, and he was training me, and so often we would ride along on jobs together, and he was always driving, and from the moment we got in that van until the time we got back, he would talk incessantly, and most of it was complaining about how things weren't being done and should be done. And on a couple of occasions, he would be talking, and I actually fell asleep till we got to where we were going, woke up, and he was still talking right on the same thing. He was just talking and talking, not connecting at all. Now, that's humorous, but if it's an important conversation that we're trying to have, it can be tragic, and at the very least, very frustrating, sometimes for both parties. Now, as you know, if you've been following along on the past broadcast, I like to use Scripture as a point of departure for the topic. And what I'd like to use today is an example from the Apostle Paul. The passage is found in Acts 17, verses 22 to 23. And this reads as follows. So Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus and said, "Men of Athens, I observe that you are very religious in all respects. For while I was passing through and examining the objects of your worship, I also found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' Therefore, what you worship in ignorance, this I proclaim to you." And he went on to explain the gospel, the message of Christ, that many of us know now, but that was largely unknown at the time. But what I want to talk about is some things that I found in this example of Paul in terms of connecting to people. I'm going to give you 6 things. Number 1, Paul went to them. Now, this was no easy task. He didn't just log on and send a message on Facebook like we do today. There was some travel. There was some time. There was expense. There was danger. There was risk involved for him to get to them. But it was important enough to connect with them that he took the initiative and he went to them. And that's what we have to do in our lives. If there's parents, if we're connecting with a spouse, if you're leading people in a job, in an organizational context or in another context, in order to really take them and all go together where we need to go, we've got to find out where they are to start with, and we've got to go to them and take that initiative. Number 2, Paul invested time to examine that which pertained to them. He saw what was around him, and he took time to examine it and understand the meaning. He didn't just pass lightly through and say, well, I told him, good enough for him, I'm on the way. He actually took time, once he got to them, to observe and to examine what was around him, what revealed things about them to him so that he could be better knowledgeable and better educated on how to connect to them. That number 3, he observed their culture and their mindset. From the things around him that he examined, he came to understand more about how they were thinking so he could connect to them on common ground in their mindset and in their culture. Number 4, Paul started where they were and created relevance. He didn't put them down for being where they were. He didn't put them down for not understanding what they were worshiping. There's something in their heart, knew there was another God they probably missed out there, so they put an altar to an unknown God. And he didn't put them down for that. He accepted where they were, he understood it, and he started communicating to them on the basis of where they were. But he didn't leave them there. He built on that common ground. He found the common ground, and he started building on it. And that's number 5. He built on the common ground. And number 6, he took them beyond where they were. He started where they were so that he could identify with them. He could relate to them. They could understand that he knew where they were coming from. And then he took them to a place they hadn't yet been. Together, he led them through to explain who this God was that they were worshiping and knew nothing about by their own admission. So I want to give you a few modern-day examples of people connecting and how this works out. Some years ago, I was at a Young Life Leader camp. We were having a retreat, and we were out in the mountains of North Carolina, and they were giving out I was new, and they were giving out some awards for people who had been there for a while, and this one man received the award for being, I think it was the best leader. It's been some years. I kind of forgot what the exact name of the award was, but he received this major award, and he very, very humble guy. You could tell he didn't even want it. He didn't want to be recognized. He just cared about the kids, and he didn't want to be honored and a big hoo-ha made about him for that. But as I spent a little time at his table and listened to him, I found out that any song that came up, he knew what it was. He knew every contemporary song that was out there. He didn't just listen to his music, his contemporary Christian or his old country or his whatever it was that he loved. He didn't listen to what most appealed to him. He found out what the kids were listening to, and he collected all of this music, and he became very familiar with it. He reminded me of that show that used to be on. I could name that tune in 3 notes. He could tell by the voice, the lyrics. He knew what was going on. He got so familiar with that music that he could then understand some of what was going on in the heart with the kids and the minds of the kids so that he could relate to them. And that made a strong impression on me. I thought it was well-deserved that he won that award because he had really had a heart to go and to connect with them and went to great lengths to understand where they were in order to do so. Another funny one, some time back, I was working with a woman, and she was very shy. She didn't like to connect with people very much. She had a very private kind of job that she didn't require a lot of interaction. And when I would go in to interact with her, it seemed like it made her so nervous that it kind of made me nervous. But what she did is she realized that she had this tendency to withdraw from people, and she wanted to connect better to where the other folks were. So what she did, there was a fantasy football league going on at the job, and she went and she joined the fantasy football league. And she would watch the games. And we'd come in, and I was so shocked when I first realized what was going on, and that this quiet, shy woman that didn't seem to want to talk to anybody knew everything that had happened in the football games the past weekend and came in and was able to converse educatedly and coherently about it. And so I asked her, I said, "You don't really strike me as the football type." I said, "How do you know so much about football?" She said, "Well, I wanted to be able to relate to where the other people were. So football is not my thing. But I joined the league, and I watch the games, and I keep up to date so that I can connect with the other people around me." Another great illustration of connecting. But I think my favorite is the one that a man by the name of Don Richardson recounts in his book entitled Peace Child. Now, Don Richardson and his family were some of the first missionaries to Irian Jaya, which we call now Papua New Guinea. But at the time that they were there, this was a backwards society. They were cannibalistic. They were headhunters. They were constantly fighting with each other and killing each other. And some of the graphics that he gives of the practices they held in the book, I won't even recount here. You could read it if you'd like. It's Peace Child. But he tells a story that's powerful, very powerful. And when he went to Papua New Guinea, there was no written language. Now think about this. He had the task of not only learning an unwritten language, he had to learn the spoken language. He then had to turn it into a written language. And then once he learned the language, created a written language, taught the people how to read the written language. Then he had to go about translating scripture into their language. And after he had done all this work, this took him years to do. After he had done all of this work, he finally was able to communicate them and to read to them from scripture in their own language. And when he first explained the story of the gospel, when he got to the part about Judas betraying Jesus, all of his audience started cheering. And he thought, wait a minute, they must not understand. Let me go back and try that again. So he went back and explained it again, and they started cheering for Judas again. And he thought, oh my, well, what have we got here? So as he talked to them, he came to understand that betrayal was one of their highest cultural values. They called it fattening a person with friendship so that you could then kill them and eat them. And he thought, oh my, what am I going to do? They are not getting this. I've done all of this work and I am not connecting. But what he did is he didn't give up. A lot of us would have given up at that point and said, okay, it's hopeless. I'm out of here. Put me on a plane back to the States. But he didn't do that. Don kept probing and stayed there longer. And he finally found something in their culture that gave him a breakthrough. What he learned was that when two warring tribes were fighting each other, if one of them had a newborn baby and they would willingly give it into the keeping of the other tribe, that would be called a peace child. And they would be at peace with each other for as long as that child lived. And the tribe had to care for it as their own, as they would one of their own. So when he learned this, he was able to go and to explain the gospel in terms of the peace child, with the fact that the whole world, we've all gone our own way and done our own thing. None of us are born seeking after God or his mindset or his heart. And he was able to explain to them that, hey, we've all been at war with God, but he gave his child for us. He's the peace child. And because he lives forever, we will always have peace with God. Once he explained it in those terms, they understood. And many of them became believers and changed the culture and got rid of some of these horrid practices. But it was digging deeper so that he could connect with them and understand them. And buried in their own culture, he found the key to connecting. And that's the case. So many people, even difficult ones, you might say, well, my boss, my wife, my husband, boy, I just don't know how to connect. My neighbor, this person, we just don't know how to connect. But somewhere there, if we'll see enough value in them to take the time to find out what really makes them tick, there's going to be something there. There's going to be something they care about. There's going to be something we can find, some common ground to connect on. And that will enable us to make some headway and increase our influence with them. So 6 more things I want to leave with you. Number 1 question to ask when it comes to trying to connect with somebody is, where are they? Just very simply, where are they? Mark Cole said that a leader's job is to lose themselves and find them. Speaking of the people they're leading. And remember, a leader, you don't have to have a position. It's somebody who has influence on another person. It's our job to lose ourselves and what we want to talk about and what we want to do and the way we think. Lose ourselves and find them. Number 2, invest time in examining what pertains to them. Just like Paul examined these artifacts and the items in the culture there in Athens. He examined them and he learned from them. Examine what pertains to them, what they're interested in. Find out their interests. Chuck Swindoll, he was been one of my favorite pastors for years. Years ago, he shared that he had become a bit distant from his son, and his son didn't care too much about church, and he had become a Harley rider. And Chuck actually went out and bought a Harley Davidson. He caught a lot of flack from it for some people for spending that amount of money on a Harley, but he said, you know what? My son is worth it. He went out and bought a Harley so that he could develop an interest that his son had and start getting reconnected and go out and ride together. Again, a number of years ago, I was at an Evanescence concert. Some of you may know that group. And one thing that struck me, the main thing actually, now that I think about it, that struck me from that concert was there was a young girl, probably, 12, 13 years old, very young teen. And you could tell she loved some Evanescence. She was a follower from the way she dressed and the way that she was engaged with the music. But next to her was her dad. And he was in shorts and a T-shirt, and it was pretty obvious he didn't really seem